60 years ago, scientists recorded the sounds coming from beneath the ocean and filed them under one word: noise. They didn't study it, they cataloged it and moved on. Then an AI ran the same recordings and found something that made researchers stop, go silent, and go back to the very beginning. What it found isn't just changing marine biology, it is forcing scientists to ask a question that nobody in this field was prepared to answer. What if we have been living next to an intelligent civilization this entire time and simply didn't know it? Let's start with the number that broke everything open. Scientists used to believe sperm whales communicated using roughly 21 distinct click patterns. 21. That was the entire library. Simple signals, each carrying one fixed meaning like a traffic light. Red means stop, green means go, nothing more. Then Project SETI, a team of researchers from MIT, Harvard, and Oxford, pointed machine learning at 9,000 recordings of sperm whale clicks collected off the island of Dominica in the Caribbean, and the system didn't find 21 patterns. It found 156. But the number wasn't even the discovery. What was sitting inside those 156 patterns is what changed everything. Every single click pattern, what scientists call a coda, was built from features that could vary independently. The speed of the click train, the spacing between individual clicks, extra clicks added at the edges, and something researchers had to borrow a term from music to describe because no word in biology was precise enough. They called it rubato, a tiny elastic stretching of timing that changes the entire meaning of what you just heard. What this means is that sperm whale communication is not a fixed signal set. It is a combinatorial system, a small number of elements recombining into a far larger space of possible messages. Linguists have a name for this property in human language. They call it duality of patterning. For generations, it was treated as one of the sharpest lines separating human language from animal signaling. This analysis, published in Nature Communications in May 2024, found something functioning exactly like it in an animal clicking in total darkness, half a mile beneath the ocean surface. And then the research went one step further and found something that nobody was ready for. The same individual whale was producing measurably different versions of its click patterns, depending on which other whale it was addressing. In human communication, linguists call this audience design. It is why you speak differently to a child than to your boss. It is not a vocabulary skill. It requires something much deeper. It requires a working model of someone else's mind, an understanding that the animal you are talking to has an inner life that is not yours, knows things you don't know, and needs information delivered in a way that matches its understanding. Close to what psychologists call theory of mind, a threshold that human children typically don't clear until around age 4. If the SETI findings hold, sperm whales have been doing this for millions of years while we were calling it noise. Now here is where things get genuinely uncomfortable, because this is not one isolated discovery. Multiple separate teams working in completely different oceans found completely different evidence, pointing to the same conclusion at exactly the same time. In November 2025, a new study published in the journal Open Mind reported something that should not exist inside a sperm whale's body. Researcher Gasper Bigas from UC Berkeley took older Dominica recordings and slowed them down, examining the internal acoustic shape of each click the way a phonetician examines a spoken syllable. What came back was staggering. The whales were producing structures with the acoustic geometry of vowels, showing the same relationships between resonant frequencies that define a vowel in any human language on Earth. Bigas identified two primary types, an A vowel and an I vowel. The recordings also contained diphthong-like structures, gliding combinations where one vowel slides into another across its own duration. Slowed down and mapped, the shapes lined up with human vowel space. Bigas said it plainly. Researchers used to think of whale communication as Morse code. This suggests it behaves more like extremely slow vowels, closer to human language than anyone expected. Here is why that is disorienting on a biological level. Producing a vowel in humans requires a larynx sitting low in the throat, fine muscular control of tongue and jaw, and a resonating chamber reshaped in real time. That anatomy took millions of years to assemble. It was assumed to be nearly unique to our lineage. Sperm whales have none of it. Their sound system evolved in the deep ocean, in total darkness, under crushing pressure for a completely different job, echolocation. Using an oil-filled organ called the spermaceti complex that fills roughly a third of the animal's head, paired with structures called phonic lips. This is a sonar organ. It never evolved toward speech. It never evolved toward language. And yet, run through sensitive acoustic analysis, it produces structures functioning like the building blocks of speech. This is what biologists call convergent evolution, the same phenomenon that gave sharks and dolphins nearly identical body shapes from completely opposite branches of the tree of life. Nature, facing the same problem twice, arriving at the same solution twice, independently, completely separately, from scratch. Dr. Daniela Rus of MIT said this without any drama. The results show far more complexity than previously believed and challenge the current understanding of animal communication broadly. That may be the most restrained sentence ever written about a discovery this large. Now, here's a detail that almost never makes it into coverage, and it should. The organ producing those vowel-like structures is the identical organ that produces the hunting click. Sperm whales are the loudest animals on Earth. Their hunting clicks measure around 230 decibels underwater. A commercial jet engine at close range produces around 140. Human eardrums begin sustaining damage near 150. Researchers who have worked near vocalizing sperm whales describe the near-field output as something you feel before you hear it. The organ that shapes something resembling vowels is the same organ that can shake a human body from the inside out. In this animal, the language and the weapon are the same instrument. But for all of this, the sperm whale findings were building slowly in laboratories over years. The moment that forced the world to pay attention happened in open water in Alaska. On December 12, 2023, a team from the SETI Institute, UC Davis, and the Alaska Whale Foundation lowered an underwater speaker into calm Pacific water. They played a humpback whale contact call, a vocalization the species uses as a greeting, as a way of announcing presence and inviting a response. Calm water mattered because wind chop alone can distort the timing data the experiment depended on. They had been waiting for conditions exactly like these. A 38-year-old female humpback named Twain, already known to researchers through years of tracking in the Alaska Whale Foundation's identification archive, approached. She surfaced near the vessel. She circled it, keeping the boat inside her turn. Then she did not call randomly into the water. She directed a contact call at the exact source of the sound she had just heard. The researchers played their recording again. She answered again. This continued. Call, reply, call, reply. 36 exchanges across 20 minutes. A wild animal in open ocean holding a structured back and forth with a research vessel. Dr. Brenda McCowan of UC Davis, who led the work, described it as what the team believed to be the first communicative exchange between humans and humpback whales conducted in the humpback's own signaling system. But the call and response was not what unsettled the people aboard that boat. It was the timing. Humpback exchanges follow a rhythm. There is a conversational gap, a window where the other party is expected to respond. Twain did not vocalize over the playback. She did not answer early. She waited for the gap and filled it precisely. Then the researchers changed the interval. They made the gap longer. She waited longer. They shortened it. She came in faster. Turn-taking is one of the load-bearing features of human conversation. It is not something an animal produces by accident 36 consecutive times, while simultaneously adjusting to a moving target. It requires treating a call not merely as a sound, but as a slot in a structure, and understanding that the slot has an owner and a proper time to respond. The SETI angle here is not incidental. Dr. Lawrence Doyle of the SETI Institute, who helped design the experiment, has argued for years that studying our failure to communicate with intelligent species on our own planet is the closest working model we have for what contact with an extraterrestrial signal might actually require. The assumption built into virtually every SETI framework is that an intelligent civilization, if it exists, will be interested in making contact and will target receivers capable of responding. Twain's behavior, responding in kind, matching timing, adjusting to variations in the signal, directly confirmed that assumption. The intelligence capable of structured contact might not need to come from space. It might already be in the ocean. Now consider what the historical record reveals when you read it with this understanding in place. When American whaling ships pushed into new Pacific hunting grounds in the early 19th century, the logs record strong strike rates at first. Then within roughly 2.5 years, the numbers collapsed. Researchers, including Hal Whitehead and Luke Rendell, in their 2001 study on cultural transmission in sperm whale populations, found strike rates in newly hunted grounds falling by around 58%. The whales had not left. They changed tactics. They moved upwind, where sailing ships struggled to follow. They abandoned the defensive circle that works against orca attacks but proved catastrophic against harpoons because it kept the entire family clustered in range. This shift spread faster than individual learning could explain. Most of the animals adopting the new tactics had never personally encountered a whaleboat. The only explanation the data supports is that survivors passed the information outward through a network spanning clans and ocean basins, reaching groups with no direct experience of the threat. Information moved across an ocean in under 3 years. Sailors of that era, men with no theory of animal cognition and no reason to be generous toward creatures they were killing for profit, recorded their unease in their logbooks. They wrote that the animals seemed to be communicating. They noted that younger whales appeared to know tactics they could not have learned firsthand. These were practical men writing down what they actually observed because they had no other explanation. And in the Galapagos, centuries later, researcher Oscar Ramirez and colleagues were running acoustic tracking on a pod of roughly 25 sperm whales when the data stopped all at once. The entire pod went silent simultaneously and vanished from the study area. The researchers eventually concluded the whales had detected the monitoring equipment, communicated about it internally, and collectively decided to stop vocalizing. It remains a hypothesis, but if it is anywhere close to correct, 2 centuries apart, the same species twice changed its behavior in direct response to being observed by humans. And then there's the Essex. On November 20th, 1820, the Nantucket whaling ship Essex was working the Pacific, roughly 1,500 nautical miles west of the Galapagos. First mate Owen Chase saw something that fit no pattern he had ever encountered. An unusually large bull sperm whale lay motionless on the surface, head pointed directly at the ship, not feeding, not diving, simply facing them. It began to move, slowly first, then faster, then at full speed. It drove its head into the hull, hard enough to throw men off their feet, circled, then struck the same damaged section a second time. The bow was destroyed. 20 men went into open whaleboats with almost no water and no food. 3 months later, 8 survived, having been forced to eat those who had already died. The account became the direct seed for Moby Dick. Chase wrote his own account within a year. The strain in his words is visible even now. A professional hunter who had watched many whales die could not make this one fit anything he understood. He described the animal acting with what appeared to be deliberate decision. He noted it came a second time, positioning itself to strike the already damaged section. Here is the detail almost nobody knows. In the hours before the attack, the crew had been repairing a damaged whaleboat aboard the Essex. They were hammering directly on the hull. Fast, repeated strikes transmitted through the wood into the water. Researchers have raised the possibility that those rhythmic strikes registered to the approaching bull as something resembling click patterns. Not a threat, not a warning. A voice coming from inside the ship. It is a hypothesis and nothing more. Nobody can test the acoustics of a hull that sank 2 centuries ago. But if it is even partially correct, the most famous whale attack in recorded history may not have been rage. It may have been a reply. The Essex was not isolated. The Anne Alexander was rammed and sunk in 1851. The Kathleen went down the same way in 1902. Whaling logs across 2 centuries record sperm whales turning back after an initial strike to press a second attack, positioning themselves between boats and calves, coordinating behavior across individuals in ways that imply shared decision-making. These were animals with the largest brains on the planet, and a demonstrated capacity to move survival information across an ocean basin in under 3 years. And the behavior has not stopped. Since 2020, orcas off the Iberian coast of Spain and Portugal have been striking sailing vessels, specifically targeting rudders. By mid-2025, over 700 recorded interactions had been documented. 7 yachts have been sunk, the most recent in October 2025 off Peniche, Portugal. Researchers traced the behavior to roughly 15 individual orcas, out of a critically endangered subpopulation of only 39 animals. The leading scientific explanation is not aggression. It is cultural transmission. Once one young animal found the spinning rudder irresistible, others watched and copied. The behavior spread into animals with no history of the original encounter. Record numbers of attacks were recorded off Galicia in October 2025, suggesting the orcas are neither bored nor frightened away. And in every single one of these hundreds of encounters, across hundreds of strikes against hundreds of boats, not one human being has been physically harmed, not a single injury, and an animal capable of killing great white sharks. That fact alone deserves more attention than it gets. Here is what the skeptics rightly say, because they deserve to be heard. Finding combinatorial structure in a signal is not the same thing as finding meaning in it. Birdsong is highly structured. So is a modem handshake. Structure is what any system develops when it needs to encode messages efficiently, regardless of whether those messages carry what we would call semantic content. No part of the SETI work has yet paired a specific click pattern with a specific external reference under controlled conditions. Until someone does that, calling it language is a choice about vocabulary, not a confirmed scientific finding. The vowel result faces a similar objection. Vowel-like resonance can emerge from any air-filled cavity of the right dimensions, and a sperm whale's nasal complex qualifies. Acoustic similarity alone does not prove the animal uses it the way humans use language. A spectrogram cannot distinguish a functional word from an anatomical byproduct. And the audience design finding, the most striking claim, is arguably the most fragile. Whales behave differently in different social contexts, and context reliably changes acoustics for reasons that have nothing to do with theory of mind. Current data cannot fully separate deliberate adjustment from simple situational variation. Machine learning systems also find patterns because that is their function. Feed one enough data, and it will return structure whether or not that structure carries any content. But here is what would settle it in either direction. A confirmed coda to reference result. A specific click pattern in a specific context, followed by a predictable and replicable response across multiple individuals, families, and seasons. Then that same pattern played back artificially, producing the same response in whales outside the original observation. Prediction, not just correlation. Replication, not just anecdote. Nobody has fully done that yet. The Twain playback is one plausible route toward it. The coda meaning tests are already underway. Out of 156 identified click patterns, one appears more frequently than any other across the Eastern Caribbean whale clans. Researchers write its rhythm as 1 + 1 + 3. 2 isolated clicks, a pause, then 3 faster clicks. It appears before deep dives, on surfacing, when scattered groups reunite after hours apart, around berths, crossing an unusually wide range of situations with almost nothing else in common. Exactly the profile you would expect from a phrase not tied to any single specific circumstance. The cautious proposal from researchers is that it means something close to I am here. Not a warning, not information about food or predators, a simple presence. If that is anywhere close to correct, the first thing we may have partially understood from sperm whales is the first thing almost every social species on Earth needs a way to say. And it has been said in every ocean for something on the order of 30 million years, through the entire evolutionary history of the primate line, through the roughly 2 centuries during which we killed these animals in industrial numbers while filing the sound under noise. Commercial whaling killed several 100,000 sperm whales in the 20th century alone. Ship strikes still kill a significant number every year. If the SETI work holds up under replication, those were not simply animals in any narrow sense. Each one was potentially a speaker carrying part of an ongoing record. And every strike ended a sentence in the middle of a word. The ocean has not gotten quieter since the harpoons stopped. Shipping noise, military sonar, and seismic blasting now saturate an environment where sound effectively replaces sight for these animals. At sufficient intensity, underwater noise causes documented hearing loss in cetaceans. Researchers use a blunt phrase for what that means. A deaf whale is functionally a dead whale. In March 2024, indigenous leaders from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the Cook Islands signed the Hiwa Ko Te Ao Declaration, formally recognizing whales as legal persons under a framework grounded in indigenous law, a direct response to exactly the question this research raises. Somewhere in that ocean right now, the answer to all of this is being taught to someone who cannot yet produce it correctly. Sperm whale calves babble. Messy, incomplete, badly timed attempts at their clan's click patterns, gradually correcting toward the adult form in a process that looks structurally similar to human infant babbling. Among the first things a calf gets right is its clan's identity coda, learned within the first weeks of life and based on decades of tracking by the Dominica Sperm Whale Project, carried essentially unchanged for the next 70 years. The first lesson is not how to hunt, not how to dive, not how to find squid in the dark. The first lesson is who you belong to, learned in near total darkness, while the mother who will teach everything else is often 1,000 meters down and out of earshot. That calf is being handed something close to a name, in a language we have only just started building machines capable of reading. It will spend 70 years using that name in an ocean where its family has apparently been keeping some kind of record of us since well before the Essex went down. They watched their families killed and kept talking. They watched their numbers collapse and kept talking. They watched the ocean fill with noise that tore their world apart and kept talking. The first message we think we might understand is I am here. The one we have not translated yet is whatever they have been saying about us the whole time. And the reason that gap is deeply uncomfortable is not that we cannot imagine what it says. It is that for the first time in human history, we are now genuinely close enough to find out.